We've talked to funder and funded and others about the aims and objectives of their work and what they're trying to achieve. And also through the case studies that some of you participated in, we're trying to look at the whole way in which art responds to the intimate and personal scales of conflict and the ways in which issues about voice and dialogue, etc., have emerged. Now, and having done that, of course, and at the very start of this, we were very conscious that we didn't want this just to be merely an academic exercise, where we design a research project, we come and speak to you, we take the data, and then we disappear. So part of what we built into that were these exchange forums. Of course, these were a great idea, but nobody told us it was going to be COVID. But obviously we're trying to continue the spirit of that. We want these to be exchange forums, and we want to hear about people's experiences, the intentions of the work that they do, what they see as what has succeeded, what they would consider as maybe better ways to approach funding and practice. And what we really want this project to evolve into, now that we've done all of that, most of that data collection and most of that work, is we want this to be relevant. And we want to come up at the end with ideas about, what is reconciliation? How do we promote art for reconciliation? How do we promote best practice? How do we look at evaluation techniques? How do we look at better ways to design the future of this type of work and its intentions, etc.? And very much the exchange forum really is about us maybe sitting back and hearing you talk and discuss these issues. So please be mindful, speak up, tell us what you think. Obviously as we evolve, we've got until April of next year. As the project continues to evolve, let's start having a conversation a few months down the road about what do we do with the findings we have, how are they relevant to you, and how could they affect both policy and practice in the future. We have a very significant group here today, which is really good, and thank you for that. And one of the things I think is really important is the roundtable discussion, obviously, which will be led by David, etc., to get us started. But I think this is there are very important questions today about knowledge to practice. So what's the point in us sitting in a university studying art for reconciliation? What's the value of that? Where is the engagement that we've had been helpful? How could it be even better? And and this is still, given we have several months left, you can still intervene, you can still tell us things that you think should be done. And then, of course, what we want to do is also do the breakout sessions and talk about development capacities for audiences and participation, audiences and participants, and also development capacities for artists. And one of the things that's really important there is, art for reconciliation isn't just funder, it's not just funded, it's about its capacity for societal reconciliation. And therefore, it's something that has a product and an output. And obviously that's consumed or enjoyed or participated in much broader than the practice itself. So you can see what we're trying to do today. We're really trying to capture voice. And obviously we're very pleased that so many of those voices have come here today.
The advertised speakers, as it were, for this first section are all people who have taken a great interest in the project as it's developed over the last few years. Ken Barclay comes at it from, I suppose, the practitioner perspective, but also the infrastructural dimension in terms of galleries and how arts organizations have engaged with peacemaking and the various opportunities and challenges that presents. Graham Stevenson has the brief within the Arts Council for research and has been an absolutely invaluable colleague, helping us with access to information, but also keeping us in touch with the wider research in this area. Eamon, as many of you will know, is very involved through the Howell Trust in Derry, coming at it more from the point of view of dialogue with survivors, victims. So we've got the kind of unifying idea of the Arts Council in the middle, and then we've got Ken to speak kind of for the arts and practitioners, and then Eamon hopefully will provide the complementary perspective in terms of those participants that the work has been reaching out to. I think one thing we've discovered as we've gone through the research is that most evaluations, as you might expect, from the point of view of peace building, are concerned with the impact of these activities on the participants, very often people who are sharing sort of stories of trauma related to the past violence and the continuing kind of peace process. Or indeed audiences, people who are reached at a sort of a second degree in terms of coming to see exhibitions, attending performances. And something that we became very aware of, particularly through the case studies, is there is another parallel story to be told about the experience of the artists engaging in this work. I mean, I would trace, again, Graham, you should help me with the long views, trace the kind of active attempts to engage the arts in peace building at least back to 1978 when Peter Melchett created the Community Arts budget within the Arts Council, but obviously with Community Relations Council and particularly the European Peace Money, that has expanded and expanded and expanded. And our own study really focuses on the post-Good Friday Agreement period, because even that is quite an enormous span we've discovered. And the theme of this session is continuity and sustainability, because again, one of the things that's become clear to us is that, you know, the piecemeal nature of this funding, the fact that it's tended to work from program to program, that artists tend to have to be quite opportunistic in the way they engage with the resources that are available, has made it hard for there to be any clear sense of sustainable development, although clearly within arts organizations, they've been able to make links from one project to another. But I think one thing we've identified is a lack of a kind of overarching overview as sort of initiative has given way to initiative. And very often the archives, the materials that relate to those previous activities have disappeared or been hard to access. And that was very much the findings of the first part of the project. But I think perhaps, Graham, is it all right to go over to you first, maybe just to get your perspective on the wider field? I know that there have been a lot of specific Arts Council initiatives, particularly in recent years, which have tried to bring together the arts and peace building. But I think it would be useful to get your perspective on some of these issues of sustainability, continuity, and indeed just for you to set a bit of background. And then we'll move to you, Ken, to get a more specific arts perspective. And I think if each of you could maybe just offer a sort of an initial sort of 4 to 5 minutes just to set the scene, and then we'll obviously keep coming back to you, but it'll be nice then to see what other expertise and perspectives we can draw on from within the participants. Graham.
Yeah, thanks, David, and good afternoon, everybody. It's also very sunny in Mid-Ulster, so I'm sure we can't compete with Egypt, but we'll do our best. Yeah, I suppose just picking up from where David started, community arts is a very strong foundation in Northern Ireland. So, I mean, certainly my time in the Arts Council, which started in the early noughties, it's been very much recognised on the work that Matarosso did, and subsequently the policy action team, which was Westminster driven. There's a recognition of how participatory arts can have transformative impacts on local communities, and I suppose when you sort of segue into the period of austerity, you see a more of an instrumental approach to the use of arts to meet government-driven targets and ambitions. And I suppose that's, if you take that a step forward, we are, in terms of the Arts Council, now driven by a very sort of business case driven mentality, where we're having to demonstrate to government in a very quantitative way that the value of the arts and how it's going to meet core ambitions of government as are articulated through the likes of the Programme for Government. But I suppose returning to David's more specific question around how we can better support practices, from an Arts Council perspective, it would be very much welcomed, I'm sure, by organisations if we could fund core organisations on a longer term horizons, and that then would enable organisations to sustain and build more sustainable relationships with the communities they support, and actually deliver reconciliation-based projects. The Arts Council does core fund around 100 arts organisations each year through its annual funding programme. And a lot of those organisations work within the arena of art and reconciliation, the likes of Kibosh and Replay Productions. And that long-term support which we provided those organisations, I suppose, have enabled them to develop strong relationships with communities through community arts-based projects and their interventions. I suppose ideally, if the Arts Council looks upwards towards government, we'd like to try and change the sort of drive for data and performance measurement and introduce a more sort of nuanced and subtle conversation, which is perhaps more narrative based around the value of art being used within this context. I think we're still a long way off from the creation of a national cultural policy framework like Culture 2025, as has been developed down south. I think if we were able to operate within a framework similar to that, I think it will be easier to demonstrate the value of arts being used within this context.
Good. Well, no, I think that's a nice point to hand over to Ken for the sort of initial information. I certainly understand the importance of core funding, because that is one of the ways of speaking to this sort of sustainability and continuity issue. And I know a lot of arts organizations are always sort of having to be reactive to whatever additional funding opportunities arise. But how does it look from the arts organization perspective then, Ken?
Well, Graham makes a lot of really important points there, and one of the key things is being able to think long term. I'm coming from I run a commercial gallery, but I'm also chair of the Digital Art Studios, which is a not-for-profit organization. And when you're looking at Arts for Reconciliation or any other type of project, you're constantly going, well, how am I going to get funding for this and for the next thing? And after the project's done, that tends to be it over. There will be evaluation. And there's lots of really great information that Graham has collected over the years. And the quantitative stuff is really useful, but we are missing a lot of the what is good and bad about projects. Particularly, people are terrified to say anything went wrong. It's sort of you'll sort of admit when you're talking to other people informally about what went wrong in projects and what you would do differently. But people don't want to write that on an assessment form because an auditor will look at it. An auditor will go, well, why are you going to fund these people for another 3 years if they've just written here that they did something that didn't work? So it is to try to get that longer term perspective, but even just trying to widen the discussion about the actual having, you've built up a central resource here through all the interviews that Pete and Alex and so on have done with lots of organisations. But there is no central resource for an archive, whether it's a physical one or a digital one. And this coming back, I mean, I used to work with Graham for 20 years at the Arts Council, and one of the projects I worked on was the Troubles Archive, which was basically this idea that was set up by Roisin McDonough and Noreen McKinney, and they had this realization that archives were disappearing. So, I mean, they decided to set aside funding to produce a pilot project, to see could you produce, an archive that digitally accessible of art related to the Troubles. And it was sort of trying to cover theatre and visual arts and music and TV, but just a small sample of each of them. And there were books and essays produced, which are all still online. And I mean, I did the administration for it, and it was really time consuming to try to start tracking down where the stuff was, which was when I realized that people were dumping stuff or just with the bare necessity that they had to keep for an auditor. So people go, oh, I think somebody has that painting. And you'd go and, the organisation would have shut, or record companies would have shut, or the staff would have moved on. And so we are losing a lot of the material that we've produced. So the two things I'd be concerned about are long-term funding and trying to keep our history, because it is our artistic history.
Yeah, I think we certainly would recognise from our research project the contradiction of the term evaluation often, that almost always it's about accountability rather than an evaluation that can assimilate both the kind of successes and the failures. And I see Tori has just posted a link there to a project on acknowledging failure in the arts, or in project generally. I mean, obviously the relevance of that for sustainability is that unless organizations can actually learn from their practice, then they get locked into ever decreasing, I suppose, models of activity.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that in terms of the Arts Council's evaluation processes, I mean, certainly, yes, we are the key development agency for the arts, and it is incumbent on us to ensure that organisations are able to take risks, creative risks, because it's very much this context that you learn what works best within, say, a reconciliation context, and it's only by taking risks that you can actually enable that to happen. So it's still very much a core part of our strategy to enable that to happen.
I mean, I understand when you were referring earlier to the programme for government targets, that clearly, the government sets a huge store by the capacity of the arts to help with social cohesion and specifically kind of reconciliation issues coming out of the Troubles and so forth. But you must also be aware, I'm sure, that many artists struggle with that sort of instrumentalization of their practice. Mm-hmm. And I mean, are you conscious as an Arts Council of having to broker between, their artistic priorities and the need to be seen in some cases to be fulfilling those kind of instrumental goals?
Yeah, and if you like, we're just on that margin or that bubble between having to report very specific outcomes relating, for example, to the religion of participants at events, which is a question in itself which can undermine and destabilize engagements, because you're asking individuals to state their religion whilst at the same time you're trying to build trust and relationships between two different communities.
As many of our participants have commented, you're reinforcing the very binaries that the whole process is supposed to challenge. So
yeah,
I mean,
and that's why I think there needs to be a softening or change to the framework which key funders like SDUPB use to administer funding, because it's only if that happens we can start developing community-based bottom-up approaches to reconciliation-based projects which are going to be based on need, because it's only when you have that trust that you can really start change.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably we look to the Arts Council as the specialist funder in the arts to kind of prioritise the artistic agenda where possible. I mean, I'm very conscious that with the successive programmes run from Europe, the Peace 1, 2, 3, 4 that SEUPB administer, I mean, it saddened me that those seem to have become progressively more difficult to access by individual arts organisations. And as far as I can see, the only Peace 4 programme that's directly dealing with an arts organisation is the Peace Academy at the Playhouse that I've had some involvement with. I mean, nearly all money seems to be devolved now through councils, I suppose on the grounds that they have the capacity to administer the sort of very heavy weight of management that's required for those programs. But one does worry then that a certain amount of the money gets diverted off into administrative costs, which otherwise might have been going directly to artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the more recent peace projects have been administered through local councils, and certainly in the lead up to Peace Plus, we've been working with government to try and address some of the structural issues around the funding process.
Access, yeah. I mean, Peace Plus then is essentially a post-Brexit Peace 5, isn't that right?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you speak about the program for government, about the frameworks of SEUPBs, the measures they use for evaluation, the kind of the counting the bodies in the room, so to speak, and which side of the binary they come from. What role or agency or power or authority do you feel the Arts Council holds or not to kind of push against some of these issues?
I think, I mean, the main influence it can exert is through our parent department, so Department for Communities, which is the link, if you like, that we form through into central government, who have a direct link with SEUPB. So it's all a bit around the houses, but certainly in papers developed by Tony McKibben, who I think is the main link with SEUPB, we've been able to feed in some of these concerns which I've raised this afternoon into our department and fed them on to Tony, who's preparing a paper around Peace Plus funding. So, I mean, as the development body for the arts in Northern Ireland, I do mean we are listened to. I suppose ultimately our position as an arm's length body has been eroded, considerably over the last 10, 15 years, which isn't such a good thing, I suppose. Now we're more seen as an agent of government. So trying to maintain a degree of independence, enabling us to talk on behalf of artists and their work within the community, within this context, is still very important.
Anne Walker's one of our guests today. I mean, she's had a conversation with us in relation with our Theatre Witness case study about the experience of people who have developed very long-term connections with projects that begin sort of as time limited because of the nature of the funding, but then those participants develop a kind of capacity and appetite for continuing to work on. And I don't know, Anne, if you want to say anything about the the longer term needs of actually not throwing away the kind of investment that's made, particularly in those sort of theatre of witness programs, and what we can do perhaps to make that kind of human investment more sustainable.
I suppose we've had this conversation, and I don't think I'm the only one that thinks it, but I think I'm one of the only people that speaks up about it. So I've been
just to explain, you were one of the performers in one of the very first theatre witness projects at the Playhouse that have continued to do workshops based on the material ever since.
So for the past 10 years, I was involved in the second Theatre of Witness production, which was an all-women production called I Once Knew a Gear. And probably, and I'll talk about it later because I'm on the panel, one of the most cathartic, frightening things I have ever done, but so worth the experience. But it wasn't just the on stage, those 14 first initial nights, it was what happened afterwards and the audience reactions that has kept me there and going to workshops and going to community and going to schools and cross-community schools, cross-community projects for the past 10 years, not just locally, but globally and across Europe. It's created a passion in me and a lot of the other participants for this work. But a lot of times, personally, I will talk on my own for myself. Personally, yeah. I feel that this is what needs to be done. This works, Theatre Witness works, these workshops work, it's transformative nature of the work. But if I walk away from that to try and get something that sustains me in my own life, a full-time job, then I'm giving up this absolute passion of something that works.
And to be fair, there are kind of some expenses available to support the work, but I think the point you've made to us is that it doesn't allow for the fact that it's very hard to make time for this when you've got, you know, lives to feed and
it's not life sustaining, put it that way, but it's heart sustaining and passion sustaining, and so important that it's hard to walk away from. And I think that it has created the fact of less of a bubble of people that are available, because people have to live their own lives as well, or have some sort of an income outside of this work. So we're talking about looking after the artists and the participants, and I think that is something that really should be looked at, especially when the same artists and participants are brought in for consultation and sort of rolled out to help with funding and stuff like that. That we should be looked at and looked after.
I'm just going to invite Robin Young if he wanted to comment on that, because again, when we were opening that discussion up with Robin, who is another Theatre of Witness participant, I mean, you'd a bit more caution about the idea of professionalising this aspect of the work, Robin, and for fear that you kind of undermine the important voluntary work that's going on. Is that a fair representation of the point you're making?
Yeah, I just had concerns around the professionalisation of it, because, I mean, somebody's just raised the point about the amount of administration now taken to run SEUPB and these programs and things like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm all in favour of supporting participants in terms of, certainly when I was working in another job, I would have to take time off in order to participate in Theatre of Witness workshops. But I wanted to do that even if it cost me money, because I really, really believed in what we were doing. And I believed, I mean, I was in the first production, which is almost 11 years old now, and yet we were still working in them right up to the start of COVID. And you could see that it was still relevant. When we first started, dissident republicanism was hardly mentioned, wasn't particularly, but it's sort of come more to the fore. I mean, how do you try and persuade young people not to get drawn into violence and paramilitarism, not just on the Republican side, but also on the Loyalist side? How do you get them, how do you address antisocial behaviour that draws them into conflict with paramilitaries? All of that stuff became relevant, and because we were continuing to run workshops with the people that we had, it continued to be relevant. regardless of whether we received any sort of funding or support. I think what happened was it took a couple of years before Theatre of Witness actually got any support at all to run out any workshops.
Mm-hmm.
And now we find the demand for workshops is going up and feeding that demand. And I'm glad there is demand. It's important that there is demand. It means people are still interested in engaging and working towards the overall goals.
I'm thinking, Ken, if I could come back to you just in terms of that broader issue of supporting artists to engage in this kind of work.
But I mean, from talking, particularly over the COVID period, from talking to quite a few artists, they don't have this luxury, because art is their income, and particularly if there's going to be, if you get a funded project and the amount of administration that involves, particularly bigger projects, I mean, there does need to be an understanding by the executive and the public that, arts isn't a hobby, that there needs to be professional artists and professional administrators, producing the art and covering the costs of all, like if you put on an exhibition or put something online, so that it becomes a teaching resource. I mean, halls need booked, even somebody to paint it, taxi drivers to turn up. There's so many costs. And, from even looking at funding that's been available to individual artists over the last, years, how much an artist can put down as being how much their time is worth is a lot lower than, say, the City Council or Arts Council. There really needs to be proper funding to keep all these types of things going and make them available to the wider public.
Your reference to consultants, I think, is helpful, because obviously the reason consultancy fees are higher is because they take account of all the background preparation and sort of resourcing that requires. I believe we've managed to kind of get Eamon on board.
How are we doing?
You're doing great, and all the better for being wanted. No, I'm just saying, Eamon, we're having a broader discussion to begin this afternoon's proceedings about the kind of sustainability and continuity of the work which has been funded piecemeal through various agencies, whether it's the peace programs or Community Relations Council or indeed the Arts Council. And we just got to a point where we're addressing the human resource that's been created through a lot of this work. You'll obviously be particularly familiar with the Theatre of Witness work based at the Playhouse, and we've just heard from Anne Walker and Robin Young about their continuing association with that. But the reason, obviously, for us, apart from the fact that you've taken such a close interest in this research project from the beginning, the reason for us wanting to include you today was to give that kind of victim survivor perspective. So feel free to sort of give us a general introduction about where you're coming from in relation to how this work can be maintained and developed. But in the context of that, I mean, it might be interesting if you'd any thoughts on how we nurture that community of witnesses that's emerged, like Anne and Robin, who continue to share their stories, to sustaining the work in that way of the initial investment. But I mean, feel free to give us a broader perspective to start with.
Well, as you know, David, I work for a small organization called Towards Understanding and Healing. And I've been involved with Towards Understanding and Healing for 20 years now. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, in March, I retired from full-time work.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the joys for me in the last 6 months has been frequent meetings with Damien Gorman.
Ah, yes.
And you know this, that tomorrow night anything can happen. The production that he has scripted takes place. And one of the joys in that is the love. And that's a word I would use very consciously, that he has shown to all the participants, 6 of whom are victim survivors. There's one semi-professional actor in the cast as well. But that notion of non-judgmentally receiving, deep listening to victim survivors, arguably that can continue without funding, arguably. I know that in my work, the people who I have connections with, we've just published a book called 200 Words in One Picture, and there's 66 participants in that book, and all of those people are sharing 200 words of their story. Those people have become close to me in my heart, and so I continue to be connected to them, even though so I would go and see people, even though I'm no longer in receipt of payment for doing that. But I'm very aware of what Ken has said about how the arts struggle to be funded. So my particular choice is, I suppose I'm in retirement or semi-retirement. I'm not so much looking at funding applications anymore, or the funding scenarios, but I know how tricky, stressful that whole scenario is. I mean, thankfully, the Playhouse, I think, have now secured a further round of funding to continue their work.
Yeah, and again, I suppose one of the things, I mean, because I'm involved as an evaluator on the Peace Academy project that Damien's work is part of, and I see Alex has helpfully posted a link to Anything Can Happen, which will be streamed as well as performed in the Playhouse, so people, wherever they are in Egypt or Malta or wherever, hopefully can access that. Also, just to say that there is a full-day conference linked to the Peace Academy's work on Thursday, which is also all available online, and we can send you a link to that as well. That project was created really in terms of coming up with something to respond to the call for Peace 4, but it just bears out the fact that all of these projects are kind of created in a moment to respond to whatever the funding happens to be at the time. And I think the Peace Academy has been particularly interesting because it has sought to both learn from previous practice and to think forward to future practice. But I'm not sure that we're seeing that continuity of vision from the funders. Now, I don't know if, Graham, you were talking about the successor to Peace 4, Peace Plus, is that the term that's we're trading under? But again, it seemed to be very much targeted on trying to identify issues that needed to be addressed rather than, you know, I wasn't aware in that consultation so much of them thinking about continuity and wanting to build on past practice, or maybe I'm doing them a disservice.
No, I would very much agree with you, David. I mean, we have concerns about the nature of their dissemination practices, in particular the timeframes that you often have around 12 weeks to build a multi-partnered program, which isn't really practicable unless you have one sitting on the fence ready to go. And also, despite their recognition of the very reductive nature of some of their targeting processes, they're still very much to the fore and centre of any programs which they run, where they're asking those being funded to align themselves to a very core set of quantitative outcomes, and as often a recipient of funding through Peace, you then have to pass those requirements on to the organisations actually delivering the work on the ground. So there is definitely an issue there about how distracting and diverting the administration of Peace programme money is. Structural funding through SEUPB, and I think in order for projects on the ground to be more effective and efficient, the processes of reporting have to be refined and improved.
Just to relate that back to your comments, Simon, I mean, you were talking about this enormous human resource that exists in the 200 people, I think you said, that contributed to your particular project.
66 people, and the project called 200 Words in One Picture.
Oh, 200 words, but still a substantial number of people who have been engaged with. I mean, I was struck talking to Damien Gorman about the developmental stage of his project. And again, to echo Graham's point, all of those 4 Peace Academy projects had to be delivered in their entirety within a few months. So, you know, unlike the previous Theatre of Witness projects, which had quite a long kind of run-in time, you know, they have had very compressed processes. But Damien was saying that, you know, inevitably he worked through existing networks, the like of the CRAN that he'd been involved with previously. I know you were very helpful to him. But I wonder to what extent the kind of community of victims and survivors is defined by a specific number of organizations. I know Damien tried to break out of that circle in a way by making himself available just by advertisement in the Derry Journal, I think. And he had some people come and see him in the Playhouse. But generally speaking, I think we seem to see a similar group of people recurring in these projects because I suppose, you know, there is a well-established network of support organizations. Do you think that the arts can do better to reach out to a wider range of participants? Is there a danger we become limited by the kind of infrastructure of support organizations?
You know what, Anne might be one who could answer that question better than me. I've certainly thoughts about it, but that strikes me as something, as someone who's participated directly in the second Theatre of Witness. Anne, does that make sense for you to answer that?
One of my concerns is about the amount of people whose stories are being I haven't gone through the process myself and know how traumatic it is, and know that there's been a support network at the Playhouse for me. And it actually, they've put me forward for counselling over a number of years. I've only partaken in that counselling this year. But I would worry about the amount of people that are sort of left high and dry after given stories, because I know how much it takes out of you. I know for definite that my experience was telling my story, and the experience of some of the other people who went on stage and told their stories was the slump afterwards, and the not knowing where to go next or how to deal with the re-traumatizing. I personally think that there should be more support out there for anybody that tells their stories in any instance.
It's interesting you say that, because I recently did an interview with one of the counsellors on the Playhouse project, and she talked about how it's a fundamental in counselling of beginning, middle and end.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we probably do need to reflect more on both in terms of how people are identified to participate in these projects, as you say, those that maybe don't follow through with it, but more crucially, I suppose, yes, what happens to people who share their stories, not immediately after, but even long after those projects are complete. But clearly the experience of yourself and Robin has been that there has been that sustained connection.
I suppose it's for us, it's because we've been involved in workshops and cross community and a lot of stuff over the years, and got involved with other community gatherings like the Warrington Peace Centre and a whole lot of things over the years, that a lot of us who have stayed with it, and with the help of our coordinators, the likes of Kieran and Claire in the past and Liam, but more than that, the relationship that we have developed with each other has really helped. So my concern for people who do this and then aren't able to develop those relationships, that they're sort of left hanging.
Do you want to come in there?
Yes, it was just about your original point about is it the same constituencies that we think the projects seem to draw in, and I would say that's partly, at the very least, as a result of the stipulations that funders put down. I mean, it was very obvious to me when Peace 4 came in that Peace 4 was seeking to try and engage people who hadn't engaged in projects before. What was happening then was I was getting text messages and emails basically going, "Hi, Robin, you're such a great guy. Any chance you could come along and participate in this project? P.S. Will you bring someone we've never met before?" The problem is that means that there's a very high risk that it's always going to be the same sort of stuff that or similar. I mean, because my network is limited. I would always think that there's a value in being able to go outside your own boundaries and recruit somebody whose experience is genuinely and markedly different, or who has a completely different view of things, even if it's contrary to your own. But it just shows how funding and administration and things like that ends up shaping the product, whether you like it or not.
And again, I mean, a phrase that often crops up in this work is the notion of hierarchy of suffering. And I noticed that, again, without a spoiler alert, I suppose, I don't think I am going to spoil anything for those of you who watch Anything Can Happen. But, you know, again, as with other projects, there were reports that participants were saying, well, look, my story is not as bad as their story. Should I be here? And in many ways, one of the things I find most interesting about Damien's work is that sometimes it's the less obviously dramatic stories which are the most revealing, because it makes you realize that all of us have had experiences, maybe at a lower level, which, you know, can connect with the stories that we're seeing on stage. And that ripple effect, that sense of people identifying, empathizing with the stories that they're hearing, seems to have been important in this work.
I think what Anne said is really important here, okay? Because and I'm very sorry to hear that you had emotional baggage or emotional down whenever you invested your time in trying to engage in reconciliation. And I think that speaks to what this project speaks to more generally. There is no such thing as a proper reconciliation strategy for this society. We have no proper PTSD healthcare. We have had societal trauma. We have not had any proper approach to dealing with societal trauma. And as you were saying, you know, you engage in reconciliation and then you feel, you know, that takes away an energy, or it brings back reflections or whatever that was, which you'd know where to go to. And I think this is what the problem is, and what we should really speak to in terms of this project is, although we're looking at art for reconciliation, where is there a coherent strategy for reconciliation in Northern Ireland? Where is there anything which sets out the concept of reconciliation? Where is there anything that is agreed in terms of the concept of reconciliation? Where is there anything that ties together the multiple ways in which people are trying to reconcile? Where is there any political energy or motivation to actually understand that reconciliation is a journey that takes us from negative peace to levels of interdependence, which takes us to mutual respect and parity of esteem? So what Anne said just struck me, because it's the fact that you have something which is an investment in reconciliation, which still takes you back to the core societal personal trauma of a conflict, and there's nowhere to go. And the reason why there's nowhere to go is because everything is ad hoc and everything is sporadic. And I think one of the things we need to do in this project is speak to that wider issue, that although we look at art, there is no coherent understanding at the level of power within our society of what a reconciliation project would be. And you know, if you look at something like building motorways, which are supposed to bring us peace, or building infrastructure, which is supposed to build us peace, it's perfectly coherent. If you do a land evaluation, you bring in an architect, you bring in the builders, and you develop it. That type of that neoliberal type piece, they can do very, very well and very easily. But part of our problem is nobody's really looking at what the real problem is in society. We don't agree what the conflict was about. So therefore, the role of the arts is ever more important, because what you illustrate and what you do is you might necessarily agree about the legitimacy of the conflict, whether you're a Republican or Unionist, or you've got the sense not to get involved at all. So it offers something which is different, but that different is still in the shadows, because overall there is no conceptual basis in the political elite of our society that is about reconciliation.
I just want to sort of invite Maria, who's joined us, or is from Colombia, who sees common, resonances between what you've said and her experience. I don't know if you've made a helpful comment there on the message feed, Maria. I don't know if you want to sort of contribute directly.
Yeah, well, very briefly, it was just a brief comment saying that I think Anne and I have met before at the Playhouse. So I think that is part of all reconciliation processes, if one can say. I mean, in Colombia, we have very robust institutional support on reintegration. We have programs that started in the 80s for ex-combatants of guerrillas and paramilitary organizations. We have 12 years of experience on a very solid reintegration program. But there is no clear strategy for reconciliation. We have government support for victims and reparations as well. And there is no cohesive strategy partly because there is no agreement on what the conflict is all about. So I wonder, even with having like all the institutional support and funding available to guarantee continuation, whether that is actually possible, whether it is an issue of just guaranteeing funding for sustainability, which I think is fundamental, but also addressing the fragmentation, which is at the very core of any conflict, I think.
Thank you, Maria. One of our case studies has been Beyond Skin, who have worked in Colombia, among other countries, including Sri Lanka. And certainly I think Darren Ferguson, who's the sort of driving force behind that, would probably take the view that agendas for reconciliation are less relevant to them because they just want people to participate in the experiential activity of music making. And I wonder, is there a danger that by getting too preoccupied with linking ourselves to reconciliation agendas, we perhaps miss some of the capacity of the arts to connect people in a different way? Or is that just, is that being a bit airy-fairy?
Can I follow up on that?
Ken?
Yeah, because a lot of the art that was produced over the Troubles wasn't produced for any sort of reconciliation reason. Like artists were producing about their own experiences, and whether that was in film or in paintings like Jack Pakenham's paintings of the Troubles, and they reflected all the different views. And it was only in more recent years when you got Art of the Troubles at the Ulster Museum, and a lot more of the various plays about different people's experiences, because we were talking about this hierarchy of suffering. I don't know what the issue is there, because we all had our own experience of the Troubles to a greater or lesser degree. And I know from people coming into our gallery, and coming to the Agreement exhibition, that a lot of it, that they're really only finding out now about what was happening on the other side. That these people are feeling that they can now recount their stories. So in our gallery, I've had people in who have been ex-UVF and ex-IRA and British soldiers, but a lot of the people are just ordinary, everyday people who weren't involved in any way at all. But they'll start telling you about their experience and their uncles and so on. And I think that's quite important, that there's now a lot of art that will inspire people to talk to one another and will bring about this sort of reconciliation. Because if you're chatting to somebody, whatever their background, that is the act of reconciliation, the sort of understanding of, because I wasn't involved, but I've heard these stories of people saying why they joined the UVF, why they joined the army. And there were people I was at school with, who went and joined the army. And I was quite surprised at that, because I came from a Catholic background. And it's really been in the last few years that they've felt that they could actually explain and they weren't doing it out of an obligation to explain. They were just chatting about what they've been doing for the last 20 years, and it was basically they'd moved to England and joined the army. So it's those odd stories, and I think, there should be funding to do arts and reconciliation, because it is critically important to our society. But there should also be just funding for producing art, and and for saving and getting that art out there, particularly in education. I'll finish off at this point. The agreement exhibition that and all the other stuff that University of Liverpool have been putting online is becoming an educational resource. Mm-hmm. So lots of other teachers can make use of it. And that's a thing that I think future funding would be great for, that if you can get the Ulster Museum's exhibition out there, the Troubles Archive, that would be the legacy of this.
And I think what that requires, though, is a preparedness in policymakers to accept that low-level engagement that the arts can work. I mean, Tori and I went to see a lovely photographic exhibition last year where a photographer had taken photographs of a Catholic church on Donegal Street and a Protestant church down the other end, and they just put the photographs in the other church. And one Sunday after church, the two congregations just walked up and down the road to look at images of their church in the other church. Now, who's going to explain how that actually operates in terms of a reconciliatory process? But it was a wonderful thing to observe. But I mean, this education aspect, does anybody want to pick up on that we need to actually extend the sort of an agenda for archiving and reclaiming information and sharing it through some kind of formal or informal educational structure?
And given an example, I'm 52 years old, and last year I joined an arts project through Derry and Strabane City Council, and it was the first time I ever saw a lot of the Northern Irish Troubles arts. Gearing the Bomb Blast, it was the first time I ever saw it, and it sort of struck me that I knew all about Picasso and Van Gogh that I had learned in school, but didn't know about my own local artists, and would never have known about some of these pieces if I hadn't have got on that course. So I think that it made me sort of question more about what has been going on around me for years and years in form of the arts, because everything else was swept under the carpet. And I really think I'm in agreement with Ken. It should be used as an educational tool and brought into the schools and brought into the communities. When you bring that kind of stuff right down to ground level, instead of those places where most of us don't get the opportunity to visit, or don't search out because we're being taught something else completely different, so we don't aspire to look for it. I think that education and policy making around our own local artists and everything that has gone on in the past 40, 50 years should be brought into communities and schools.
Yeah. It seems to me there is a need for lobbying in that regard, particularly given the STEM dominance of the education agenda at the moment. I mean, I think we need to be making the case, I suppose, with those that frame the curriculum.
One of our main programs that we're running in collaboration with the Urban Villages is the Creative Schools program, and it's in its third year, and it's very much demonstrated the value of creative learning to sit alongside core curriculum-based activities, and some young people who have never been exposed to or have engaged in participatory arts processes have it's really impacted upon them massively. Some of their experiences were very much cathartic in nature. So there is definitely room for creative learning processes to be used within our schools as well, and certainly some of the schools in Derry, St Cecilia's, for example, has picked up on the need for creative learning approaches to sit alongside core curriculum.
No, that's encouraging. I mean, Ken Robinson's death recently reminded us just how that agenda seems to have been sidelined in recent years. Maggie, I think you were keen to contribute.
Funnily enough, I wanted to pick up on an earlier point and the later points about the use of the artists, the professional artists. We're all real people. and a lot of us are experiencing a lot of hardship right now. That doesn't mean to say that artists should be leading projects. I found a very interesting concept from Stella Duffy about conabling as opposed to enabling. In other words, not leading from the top down, but you know, giving something with you know, alongside, and learning themselves in the process. It's not about being Lady Bountiful. There, you know, there is what needs to happen at these levels in the rehearsal, in studios or wherever these works are happening, is a mutual education. It isn't one way, it's not dispensing, but there are skills and life experiences and things that an artist, or a professional artist, you know, that term, can bring and learn in return. That's one point. And in relation to what's been said recently, if I can simply take it in terms of the amount of archives, Troubles archives, you know, that have been closed down or mothballed. And that includes our big broadcasters as well. The BBC have stopped various. There was a State Apart archive that was being collected, and I don't know where that went. But they should be easily accessible learning tools.
And Kane is under threat as well, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
And if I may make a plug here, my husband was the editor on Pop Goes Northern Ireland. That's been on the iPlayer for the last year. That's going as well. So there are condensed areas of, I'm talking really about history that are also, should be known more of and disseminated and shared. And if we are talking about the multiple facets of reconciliation, we need to be able to see things from various vantage points, however we see that. So sorry, that's all a bit of a sort of a rush and a muddle, but they're my thoughts on this. There's a lot more we can do.
Those are very important points. And again, it chimes with our wider concern as a project in trying to develop more available archival materials. I don't know, Pauline, if we'd thought necessarily about this being an educational resource, but that's clearly an important idea.
Yeah, what I was going to type was that this theme of losing material, losing histories, losing memories, institutional, and for artists, their own practice, which has been built up over many, many years, and is really a very the product of a very deep engagement, not just with conflict, but actually with attempts to build reconciliation rather than just, you know, responding to conflict. I think that the threat that's posed by the kind of fragility of the structures that exist to capture it, but also increased now, as Maggie pointed out, with the kind of extra pressure that's being put on people due to the current crisis, which is sort of accelerating this loss, as something that's come up again and again. And myself and Alex have captured that during the course of this research project and pulled that concern out of our research advisory committee meetings. And we are currently working on ideas to try and develop something that will actually, you know, really get to the heart and address that at the kind of a follow-on. And in answer, having gone round the houses, David, in answer to your question, yes, I think we do see it as a resource. First and foremost, though, I think at the front of our minds is that it's a resource for the people who produce the work and the organisations. And then, of course, once that's consolidated, it can then be used in different ways. And yeah, educational is one of them.
I guess it's kind of continuing from what Pauline was saying, but also what Ken was saying around how do we sort of decide or sort of distinguish art that works towards reconciliation from art that has reconciliatory outcomes but doesn't set out necessarily to achieve them? This is a challenge we've come up against when looking at like what we might include in an archive. We've been talking to lots of people from the Ulster Museum and elsewhere who would say that, you know, a piece of work can become, in a particular context with a particular audience, reconciliatory, depending on where it's made and whether it's included in a particular exhibition. A play is performed in a different context and takes on those meanings. So I think that has very important implications for funding, because of course, to apply for funding, you have to say, this is what we're going to do in terms of outcomes. This play is part of reimagining Belfast, and therefore has to achieve these specific outcomes. But a lot of the work we look at does achieve reconciliatory outcomes, but without really beginning with those outcomes, right? So that's what creativity is about in a way. It's about experimentation and about the things that might happen on the periphery of an activity become really important to that activity suddenly. Certainly, like chatting to Anne Walker as well, like all the stuff that was going on around Theatre of Witness, for example, in people's families and communities, that wasn't intentionally part of the project, but that was as important, or if not more important, in terms of its reconciliatory outcomes. So I guess this is becoming a question, which is, does that aspect of creativity, the kind of process-led aspect of creativity, mean that we need to think of a different way of funding these projects? Does it need to be more general? Do we need to have more core funding and less funding that's specific to, let's say, reconciliation as a stated outcome at the beginning of a project? Do we have to consider a more flexible notion of outcomes when we're designing pots of funding and funding application forms and those sorts of things?
I think what was exciting about the Peace Academy that's just coming to its conclusion at the Playhouse was because it was framed as a learning initiative. It did actually create unexpected outcomes. So for instance, there's podcasts, there's graphic novels, there's a music CD. I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said, I think, for having some kind of open-endedness. But then how do you justify yourself to the funders? That's the catch-22.
Actually, I want to share with you my thoughts. Maybe it's not relevant from your point of view, but living in the Middle East, actually, it's kind of overwhelming for many reasons, as you know, as you read every day for the newspaper. For me, actually, I feel like whenever we talk about art intervention, most of the people look at it as it's something like for entertainment, not something really serious for intervention, especially in hot zones, or as we call it, red zones, where we have many escalated conflicts. So my idea is how we can cooperate to work together instead of working in isolated islands. Like the peace activist communities, they work together, and the artists who are working for community reconciliation or conflict resolution or whatever, they are working also in their isolated island together. So I feel like we need that type of non-formal education forms, like training workshops, online forums. I don't know, maybe you have more ideas about that, to bring these two parts or two groups to work together as peace activists and artists. And maybe that will be more reasonable and attractive for fund organization or institution. So the idea is we want to make them come together and learn about the contribution and the value for each of them. Because on the other side, to be honest, when you talk to any artist, you feel like they look at the other people who are working with traditional techniques like mediation, negotiation, and so on, as they are, you know, you are working for years. What was the result? You're wasting money, time, effort, and people still being killed. And they have many conflicts on the ground. So this type of discrimination, I can say, between these two groups, it makes it not that much valuable for the community. I think we need to bring them together. So for the artists, they know more about the traditional techniques, about dialogue, reconciliation, early warning techniques, and so on. And at the same time, for the peace activists to know more about art intervention and the value and the contribution they have in the future or in any kind of intervention. So this is the idea, to bring them together, to learn together, and to come up with an initiative that they can implement in the communities.
Eamon Baker, do you want to come in on that? I'm just thinking of the relationship between, I love the idea of peace activists, but sort of, you know, people who are working in that field and how you get them to engage more easily with artists.
You know, I find myself thinking again about what I said right at the beginning. And I've been so inspired by Damien Gorman. I don't want to put him on a pedestal. He's a very human guy, a very creative guy. And it seems that what he has done in this city, our city, is he has interacted, and he wouldn't use that word, he has been with people in a very human way.
Mm-hmm.
He has listened very carefully. He has created from their stories an art form. As you know, David, he has introduced into the tradition of theatre witness a fictional character. So anything can happen as a fictional character. And what I witnessed up close and personal is the abundance, I'm going to use the word again, love, that exists currently with that group of people who might describe themselves as victim survivors. And, you know, in terms of this word sustainability, I believe those relationships are sustainable. And it's like a microcosm of what is possible, because the people there are from all sorts of different backgrounds. So those relationships, I don't think depend on funding. They are sustainable because of the wonderful way they have been heard, they've been facilitated. People like Kieran Griffiths as a director, the set, all of that has conspired in a most beautiful way. Now, I haven't seen the production. I'll see it tomorrow night. But that's what comes to mind. And I know that Anne and James Greer and Kathleen Gillespie have been going on to schools. So there's ongoing work that can come out of this as well.
Your use of the word relationships triggers a thought in me. You know, so often when you meet groups working like this, they talk about the group they're working with as a family.
Yes.
And in the same breath, they'll say how this work has allowed them to communicate to their own families in ways that they have never done. So it suggests there is something particular about the nature of this artistic family, which is something we should really cherish and celebrate.
And you know, there's the COVID crisis, which has meant that there cannot be an audience in the Playhouse. But out of that crisis is the opportunity that for 4 nights, this production will be streamed throughout the world.
But Dua, I hope you will get a chance to see this work if it's online, but also something that Eamon highlights is that Damien's work is often with creative writing groups. And there seems to be a very fluid relationship between his facilitating creative writing groups for poets, for story writers.
Yeah, I think sustainability is a big thing, and like Anne and Robin, and I'm sure a few others have been involved with various plays and things, and a big thing is the post-panel discussion afterwards, which I think is probably worth as much sort of benefit for the sustainability, as Eamon talks about developing of relationships, as the play itself. So it's all about trying to keep that going. And Robin makes a very good point there about how we're talking about things today that can cut across maybe the official approach, the official processes, but looking at the programme for government, which I see there's 12 particular outcomes they're looking for. I think art for reconciliation and what we are talking about today seems to address maybe 5 or 6 of those anyway. So even if we were to go to these MLAs and MPs and things and say, look, we need to invest in our future, we need to invest more importantly, speaking as a potential grandparent, on our children and our children's future, then this is a great product that we have here, and we need to invest in it and take it forward. And I think those are the big things I would like to see, sustainability of the good work that is being done here.
Well, just to really sort of talk about to mention some of the points that have already been discussed, but one of the things that I keep thinking about is the relationships that are created within these projects, which I have experienced working in the Peace Academy over the last 18 months or so.
Of course, yes.
And I'm working with Theatre of Witness, and how, you know, how do we tell funders about those relationships, or do they believe in those relationships that still exist outside the project, even if it's in like a WhatsApp group or the friendships that are created through that? You know, it's very hard, especially with peace funding, as we all have discussed and know about, to write about that kind of information. And what kind of language should we use when describing those relationships to the funders, so it allows them into that world as well, so they're learning from these processes as well?
I want to just share, for the last 10 years, I'm a theatre director and I work in Bosnia. But with the second generation, with young people and communities. And one of the issues about reconciliation is that reconciliation is not something that's, that when you advertise a theatre project that is going to deal with reconciliation, no one will really apply. Because there is no consensus about narrative, and people are tired of the war and who is to blame and stuff like that. So to get around that, so I work with Mosmira. It is a UK very small NGO, so that use arts for peace building. So that's the phrase. But what we do is devised comedy pieces. So we advertise it as a comedy piece. And then a lot of young people come, and then we don't have issues with permissions from officials, and then we can perform in theaters as well in schools. So to come back to this division, is the art for reconciliation or art per se? So there is also this kind of complexity when when official society doesn't want reconciliation projects, but you are still doing it, and still the relationships are connected, and still a lot of past and testimonies are coming out, but in a different way, if that makes sense.
And are there particular sensitivities that you have to be aware of in seeking to use comedy as a vehicle for this work? I mean, one imagines it could be a bit of a minefield.
Oh yes, it can. But so we, when we started it, we used Shakespeare. So Shakespeare comedies and fools and stuff. But then we start using a device. So we start devising a full-length theater piece using just one word, like voice or mustache. And then the participants would develop the whole full-length piece over 3 months. But the comedy as a genre that we are dealing with would allow a lot of freedom, and the connections would kind of create quicker. But then comedy also is very critical of society. So then a lot of other stuff would come out that would surprise everyone, including the audience. So it has potential. It is a minefield because you need to deal with stereotypes, and you need to look, how you ridicule it, and you need to navigate all these minefields. But
you've done this work in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, or where is it?
No, in Prijedor. So Prijedor is where it's northern Bosnia. It's where concentration camps in Omarska
and do you find that people from the different communities are drawn to the work? I mean,
yes, so to come back to earlier points for the funders, one of the things we do not ask for, ethnicity or religion, saying that because by name sometimes you can find out, and talking to people you can find out. So it is very mixed group of.
But presumably it's reflected in the stories and the comedy that is told.
Yes, of course. But there is also, like, first year when we did voice, the young people wanted to have a soldier in the piece, and there was a huge debate: do we have a soldier? Whose side soldier? What the soldier story would be? But then, after a really good debate within the workshop, we decided to have a soldier who would be silent. So throughout the piece, the soldier is the only figure who is trying to tell the story, but no one has time. And the soldier was played by a woman. So, and only at the end, when the happy end happened of that whole story, that unlucky man, comes to the soldier and said, "Okay, now tell me your story," and then it was the end of our piece. So the figure of paradoxically, this history and this past was stronger on stage, because from the beginning, from the moment when the audience was entering the space, you had the silent soldier in the corner, actually female soldier. that encapsulate everything, rape camps, and all that was happening in Bosnia. And then that soldier that no one wants to listen to, that no one wants to hear the soldier's story. So, and then, so sometimes out of restrictions, a stronger kind of.
No, indeed. And did you say this was a younger generation engaging with the history of the violence?
Yes, we work with the second generation. So those are people, young people, age 16 to 25, from whole Prijedor area, and urban, rural. So because
here we tend to find that generation are less interested in engaging with revisiting the kind of Troubles legacy. I mean, is there an appetite for those younger people to deal with those historical issues?
So what we find out is that there are, because everyone is growing up with their own narrative, ethnic narrative, because especially in rural areas, the schools are segregated. So if you're growing up in a Muslim village, you have completely different curriculum than 2 kilometers away in a Serbian village, history or language curriculum. And they're clashing. So some of them want to find out what's happening. Some of them want to find out what's happening from the other side. Some of them strongly believe in just one-sided truth. So there is everything in between.
And Roger makes the point that we've engaged with comedy as peace building through our television series Derry Girls as well. So it's clearly part of the mix. Well, look, I'd like to invite, unless there's anybody else that is, we obviously hope to hear from all participants as the program continues. We'll be taking a break after this session for 15 minutes, and then Pauline will be helping organize people into either the group focusing on the artist experience or that focusing on the participant audience experience. But we will draw those strands together at the end. But is there anybody else just on this broader issue of sustainability, continuity, how we build on the legacy of the investment that's been made in Peace for Arts work over the last 20 years?
From London, I am at the University of Arts. I'm a senior lecturer here.
Brilliant.
And I have been involved in quite a large research project for the last 2 years called Art and Reconciliation. And it's been funded by Arts and Humanities Research
Board. Oh yes, we know
it's
about
a partnership
you.
Between...
We've been following your activities with interest as a sister research project.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I must say the partnership really kind of was spearheaded by King's. And King's University really what you see as a kind of framework and angle that ended up being Art and Reconciliation project. But I must say that interdisciplinarity in this case was incredibly difficult. And as an artist, I have contributed a lot to a project, and I feel enriched in relation to scholarship for this discourse of peace, justice, and reconciliation. But I must say there were incredible difficulties in collaboration, simply because of the way that arts has been taken as this kind of gear. And I guess maybe in the last half or the second half of this symposium, we are going to be maybe talking about the responsibility of the artist, because there is a lot that's been kind of taken on artists' shoulders to answer for the things that politicians couldn't kind of do. Suddenly we are expected to do so, and it becomes really difficult, especially because there is an overwhelming misunderstanding that everybody understands arts.
Could I just clarify, Nella, what the nature of the interdisciplinarity of the project was? Who were the artists working with in the research?
Well, we had political scientists, historians, and artists together. The interpretation of political scientists and artists has, and historians have been very much in the form of, let's say, photograph as evidence. For them, that was art. And it was really difficult to move them away from that kind of interpretation of data, if you like, and to go into something that is poetic, metaphorical, interactive. That was really hard for them. Really hard.
I think, Nella, there is a separate exchange forum to be had on that very important issue. We've often joked that we need an AHRC funded program into reconciliation between artists and social scientists. But it is actually that dialogue, I think, which makes the work, sort of groundbreaking. So I want to suggest we put a marker down for that interconnection to be discussed in one of our future forums. So thank you for that.
I just wanted to kind of follow the Maya's conversation about Bosnia, simply because our project was in Sarajevo and our experience is somewhat different in sometimes the same, but if anybody is interested, I'm happy to.
No, we definitely should. We should foster more dialogue, I think, between the various AHRC projects in this broad area, because we also have one based at Queen's looking at music specifically in this field. So I think that's something to follow up on when we finish this session, to come back to you on that, Nella, if we may.
I was really interested, David, in the phrase "comedy can be a minefield."
Yes, I knew I was walking into that one as I said it.
Yeah. And another thing that come to mind is, in terms of my upbringing in the Catholic Nationalist Republican community, unheard voices for me would be, for example, a British soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the gifts that I have in my life is my relationship with Lee Lavis, who, as you know, was part of the Blood Red Lines production.
Indeed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So these productions in the tradition of theatre witness have allowed me in a special way to be connected with what some people refer to as the other. James Greer, who was in the very first theatre witness production, I have a great regard for and a connection with, which I would never have achieved, I guess, if I had not seen him and been deeply moved by what he was saying on stage in the very first K.S. Sebenuk production.
Indeed. And again, and I suppose it's Lee's exceptional status as one of the former soldiers that's engaged in these processes that makes him stand out so much. And I suppose the danger is then, we're missing other voices, but that's a good point. Ken?
Well, I think there's been a lot of ground covered. So, I think what it shows is they're hopefully at the end of this process, whatever comes out of it will argue strongly for more funding, sustainability for Arts for Reconciliation, and whether that is out to the executive as a sort of separate funding, because what tends to happen is you do community arts or whatever, and they just sort of go to the Department of Communities or go to the Arts Council. So you're bidding against all these other things. We're trying to see how important the arts is for reconciliation, which cuts across a lot of the themes of the programme for government. So it really requires our voices and the people that we know to be lobbying for Arts for Reconciliation as a separate fund and building the sort of things we want to see here in the future.
Thanks, Ken. So to continue my ballistics metaphors, Graham, hopefully that gives you more ammunition.
Very good, David. Yes, I think just to build on Ken's point, really. I mean, if we want to, we need to build a narrative around outcomes, and I think government is still very much siloed and isn't enabled, if you like, to address these issues in a cross-cutting way. But certainly from this, I'm taking from these discussions a need for more core funding for arts organisations rather than programme-driven. So there needs to be more space for organisations to deliver what just an arts programme, and regardless of the context it's delivered within, it'll have reconciliation outcomes. And also,
go on, Graham, sorry.
Just finally, David, just to need for a co-design approach, where we're working with arts organisations and artists in the design of projects which can then go forward for peace funding, because I think by doing that they're going to be more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think in that, I mean, in terms of accountability, track record must count for more than it has been. You know that, there does need to be that leap of trust that companies like Kibosh, who have been delivering so consistently for so many years, deserve a bit of latitude. But look, thanks for that, particularly to Graham, Eamon, and Ken for helping get us started. But it's such a terrific experience to hear such a broad range of perspectives, particularly from Colombia, from Bosnia, from Egypt, and so forth. So I hope all our international guests, not to mention Malta, all our international guests will continue to keep our vision wider than just the Goldfish Bowl of the 6 counties.